Assalomu alaykum, Kun.uz obunachilari. Bugungi suhbatdoshimiz Amerika Qo'shma Shtatlarining O'zbekistondagi Favqulodda va muxtor elchisi janob Deniel Rozenblyum. Assalomu alaykum, Mr. Ambassador.
Wa alaikum assalam.
First of all, on behalf of Kun.uz news agency team, I would like to thank you for sharing your time for today's interview. So, how does quarantine currently affect the work of the embassy?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to the interview today. It's a pleasure to speak to you and your audience. And before I answer your question about how the quarantine has affected our embassy, I just want to express my sympathies to the people of Uzbekistan and especially the residents of Sirdarya and Jizak who were affected by the floods last Friday. It's very sad to see how people lost so much, their homes and their belongings. And I know that people all over this country are thinking about those victims and also trying to help them. I saw how people spontaneously gave clothing and other things they collected to give to the families in Sirdarya and Jizak. We actually visited yesterday. I went to the Youth Union here in Tashkent, where some donations were being collected to send to Sirdarya. We were fortunate that an American organization, an NGO, decided to donate some funding to buy things needed by the families in Sirdarya. And I went there to help load the trucks and just to see the things that have been donated. So it's very sad to see this tragedy, but it's also encouraging to see how everyone is trying to help each other. In terms of your question about the quarantine and how it's affected us, I should say, first of all, that my most important responsibility as U.S. ambassador is the health and safety of the staff at our embassy, American and local staff. And also Americans who are here in Uzbekistan, either visiting or living. That's really my main job, a very important part of what I do. So of course we had to think carefully about how best to protect the health and safety during this pandemic. And what's happening is, first of all, the majority of our staff are not coming to work, not coming to the embassy. Mm-hmm. They're working using their phones or their internet connections. Fortunately, some people, because of the nature of their job, are not able to do that. They can't work remotely. But at least those people, even if they have to stay at home and not do very much right now, they can still get paid. We've been able to keep everyone where no one's going to lose their jobs, and people are fortunate they're still going to get their salaries. In general, the normal work of our embassy has been affected a lot because diplomatic activity has almost stopped. It's really hard to do normal diplomacy and relations when things are locked down the way they are. The government of Uzbekistan, of course, is very focused on the pandemic, facing the same restrictions of work that we are. And so I have not had a meeting with anyone in the government for the past 7 weeks in person. Now I have been able to maintain some contact and conduct some business by phone, by video chat like this. And for example, I've been in touch with your ambassador in the United States, Ambassador Bakaba, several times by Skype. Last week, I participated in a hearing held in the Oili Majlis that Senator Akmal Saidov organized on human rights, and I was asked to participate, and I did by video. And I've had regular conversations with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, again by telephone, about important issues like Afghanistan, for example. So we've been very much affected, but we're still trying to do what we can to maintain communication.
What assistance and support does the United States provide to Uzbekistan and U.S. citizens residing in Uzbekistan during this coronavirus pandemic?
Thanks for that question. It's, we're trying to help in every way we can, although it's not easy because our own country is suffering a great deal right now, as everyone knows. But I would say, one of the things we've all learned from this pandemic is how important it is for countries to help one another. This is an international crisis, a global crisis, and it's only going to end through global and international cooperation. So here in Tashkent, we've been participating, our embassy staff have been participating in regular meetings, almost daily, I believe, held by the Ministry of Health and the United Nations, which is intended to coordinate all the assistance coming to Uzbekistan related to COVID-19. And the idea is to identify the needs and prioritize them, and then figure out who can provide what help. So through that cooperation, the US has done quite a bit. Early on, going back even into February, before the first cases were confirmed, first COVID-19 cases were confirmed here, we donated some personal protective equipment, or so-called PPE, masks, gloves, gowns, and so on, for medical workers to have. We made a donation in February, and then another one in March of that type of personal protective equipment. We then really moved a lot of our focus to helping build the capacity of Uzbekistan's Ministry of Health, Agency for Sanitation and Epidemiological Well-being, and hospital workers and healthcare workers to deal with COVID in terms of diagnosing it, how to protect health workers, how to do tests, and many, many other aspects. And so that's, in the past, say, 2 months, that's really been our main focus. More recently, we're really working a lot on testing and improving the capacity of Uzbekistan to conduct tests for COVID-19. It's not just training, it's also equipment. We've been providing test kits, chemicals and supplies needed to conduct the tests. And the idea is to make the tests accurate and quick, so they can be conducted and get results as quickly as possible. Most recently, our Centers for Disease Control, CDC, announced $2 million of assistance focused on the testing capacity primarily, and the laboratory supplies needed for that. And I just learned yesterday that CDC is also working on something which I had not heard before, which is trying to help Uzbekistan develop its own emergency operations center for public health. And this is something that we have in the United States. And I was, just by coincidence, I was lucky enough to visit it myself in February. I was back in the US in February, and I went to Atlanta, where CDC is headquartered, and I saw this emergency operations center. It's amazing. And they're going to try to help Uzbekistan create its own capacity to do a similar thing. So we expect to have some more announcements in coming days on more assistance, but for now, that's what we're doing.
Your Excellency, what is your opinion about the future of international diplomacy after the pandemic? And what countries should pay more attention to in international relations?
Well, that's an excellent question. It's a really, it makes me think a lot about things that I can't predict. That's this pandemic is unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life. And I think that's what many of us could say the same thing. It's certainly different from anything I've experienced in almost 35 years of my professional life, my working life. And so it's really hard to predict how it's going to affect us in the future. It's a little bit like, it reminds me a little bit of probably how the early explorers who crossed the Atlantic Ocean to go to America felt, because they were entering completely unknown territory that no one had explored before, and they had no idea what they were going to find on the other side. And I think we're in the same position. The one thing that's clear to me is that this pandemic has confirmed for everyone the reality that our world is very interconnected between trade, business, tourism, travel. There's so many complicated connections between the countries of the world. And that's mostly a good thing, right? It's provided all kinds of benefits to the world and to individual people. But sometimes it's bad, or sometimes it's a challenge, and it creates dangers for us. And so I think what's going to happen is that on the other side of this crisis, there will be a period when all countries will be reevaluating and reassessing how the interconnectedness of the world makes them vulnerable and creates maybe some weaknesses, some vulnerabilities for them. Just to give you one quick example, in the United States, I know there's a discussion going on right now about what this crisis has revealed about our dependence on other countries for critical supplies related to health. So, for example, a lot of the things that we needed most to fight coronavirus, to fight COVID-19, we realized we have to get them from other places in the world. And I think that makes people uncomfortable. So I suspect that after this crisis, there will be a focus on how can we produce more things domestically in the United States that we need for emergencies. So that's just one example, but I think countries all over the world will be facing the same questions.
Could you please tell us when the visa issuance process will be resumed in Uzbekistan?
Well, I can't tell you for sure. I don't have a specific answer. I can tell you that, as I think everyone knows, the consular services that our embassy provides have been suspended, and that's global. Like every embassy in the world, every US embassy is the same. And there will be no, it's been announced, there will be no immigration visas issued until June 22nd. So there's a suspension until June 22nd. That also includes the so-called diversity visa program, which I know is very popular in Uzbekistan. A lot of people apply for it. But there's been some discussion already in Washington about when we're going to, about gradually restarting some of these services, but we're still waiting for an official announcement. So I just would advise anyone who's watching or reading this interview to check our embassy webpage regularly, and we'll be making announcements when things are going to start again.
We see that you are actively taking part and providing support to the audiences on social media. So in general, how the quarantine measures taken in Uzbekistan are affecting your life, your personal life?
Well, it has affected me, of course, just as it has every person, almost every person in the world, literally. I do go to the embassy a few days a week normally, but I mostly work at home most days. And when I'm not working, I am reading books, watching videos, watching movies online. I try to exercise a lot to keep active. I'm very lucky also to have some exercise equipment I can use in the house. And I also go for walks in my garden. It's not so big, but I can walk around and around in circles many times. And the nice thing about that is that the spring here in Tashkent is beautiful. This is my first spring spent here in Uzbekistan. And I've been loving the gorgeous weather and just being out in the sun. So I spend a lot of time in my garden. Also, I think you may know, and many of your readers and viewers may know, that I'm here by myself and my family is back in the United States. And so I try to stay in touch with them as much as I can, either talking by phone or more often using video chats to stay in touch with them. My daughter and I have a 17-year-old daughter, are reading a book together where we read one chapter every day, and then I send her questions about the chapter for her to answer by texting, and that's how we read together. So, we do what we can, and all of us do, all of you, everyone in Uzbekistan too, to stay in touch with people despite the distance and despite the isolation. It's really important, I think, to stay connected to your family and your friends, especially during a difficult time like this.
Mr. Ambassador, what books have you read recently?
Yes, well, I have more time than I did before to do many things. I would say reading is something that I absolutely love. I've always loved reading since I was a little boy. And I only regret as an adult, I don't get to read very much because I'm always, you know, busy with work. So having a little more time to read has been a blessing. And in terms of the books that I've been reading, I love history. I'm a big fan of history. I was a history major at university. And so many of the books that I've been reading are either historical books or they're novels, they're fiction, but about things that really happened in history. So for just to give you an example, I read a book in English called The Last Days of Night. Mm-hmm. And it's about the early days of electricity, the invention of electricity and using it for lighting and other things. And even though it's actually a novel, it's based on Thomas Edison, our great inventor of electricity, and his life, and also George Westinghouse, who was another big pioneer, and Nikola Tesla. So Tesla, Westinghouse, and Edison, and how they kind of fought with each other. And it was a great book, really wonderful. And I also read, a little before that, I read an interesting book that's a history of Islam and the very early emergence of Islam. It's called The Shadow of the Sword, and by a British author. Anyway, so I'm reading a lot, and I love the history.
Are there any books you would recommend Uzbeks to read?
Well, I don't usually give recommendations like that because everyone's interests and everyone's tastes are so different, and I wouldn't want to tell anyone what to read. But I can tell you a book I read last year that I really loved and I would recommend to anyone to read. It's actually by an Uzbek author, Hamid Ismailov is his name, or Abdul Hamid Ismailov, I think is his full name. But I think he actually lives in London. And he wrote a book in Uzbek. It's called Jinlar Bazmi. Jinlar Bazmi. In English, they translated it as Devil's Dance. But it's a fascinating book. It's a novel also, but a historical novel based on the last year or 2 years of life of Abdullah Qadiri, the famous author, and it's about how he spent that year in prison. He was imprisoned and tortured and eventually shot by the secret police under Stalin. And during the novel, during the story that Ismailov imagines, Qadiri is writing a novel in his mind, his last novel. And the novel that he's writing is about what was happening in Bukhara and in Kokand in the last days of the Emir of Bukhara and the Khan of Kokand. Their harems. It's about female poets. There were some very famous female poets from the 19th century, and they feature in it. So Qadiri is writing this book in his mind while he's suffering these terrible things in his life. So anyway, I thought it was a great book, and I would recommend people to read it in Uzbek. It's available in Uzbek or in English, either one.
And before concluding our interview, could you describe Uzbekistan and its people with 3 adjectives?
I think one adjective I would use would be generous. That is, people are generous not just by sharing what they have, but also by giving from their hearts, by showing that they care in a very open way. They don't hold it back, they express it, and I appreciate that generosity. I think another adjective I would use is diverse. Diversity. But yeah, diverse is the adjective. And what I mean by that is not just that there are many different, of course there are many different people in Uzbekistan, from different nationalities, but the whole origin, your history, and the way your culture has come together has so many different threads woven together you know, from Persia, from Arab world, from Slavic world, from Chinese, from everything. It's all woven together and it's very diverse, which makes it interesting to me. And I only get three, so I'll try to come up with one more. I would say social. Maybe that's the right word, social. And by that I mean there's people are constantly communicating with each other. The mahala, the communities, you know, working with each other. And social is kind of a neutral adjective, so it could be good and bad. It's mostly good. Sometimes it means that people don't have as much privacy. I don't think your society values maybe privacy as much as America does. It's not as big of a value, because the social is emphasized so much, and so that's my impression after living here for a year and after visiting before. But all I can say is that I love your country. I love its people. And I'm really enjoying being here.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, for your support, and for your kindness. And I hope that we will pass this pandemic crisis very soon. And I wish you best of the luck on your mission in Uzbekistan, and stay healthy, and hope to see you next time again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Qatar Rahmat.